Hi, my name is Jan. I work as a gameplay programmer, and that is not at all relevant today because I'm here to talk about the TV show Medabots.
Medabots!
Medabots is a franchise of role-playing games that peaked in popularity around the 2000s and spawned toys, figurines, and even a TV adaptation. Today, I'd like to talk about that show, and specifically episode 34, Me and My Shadow Sword. The premise of the show is somewhat similar to Pokemon and other shows from that time. People team up with sentient robots called Medabots to battle with each other and become the best Metafighter and Medabot pair. The main characters are Icky and Medabi. At the start of the show, they meet each other and decide to partner up. They face increasingly strong opponents on their way to the top. A few early victories make them overconfident though, and they hit a roadblock in the form of Koji and his partner Similidon. Koji is a recurring character in the show who is introduced as the legendary Metafighter, someone who has never been beaten before. Icky and Koji fight multiple times over the series with mixed results, but Koji keeps being one step ahead. But Koji has a problem. You see, Koji is not the main character of the show. Koji is a rival. A rival is a type of character which is quite common in the genre. To show how much the protagonist is improving, a character is created to act as a benchmark for their skills. Famous rivals include Gary Oak, Vegeta, and even more outright antagonists like Moriarty. Usually, the hero eventually surpasses them though. On paper, Koji has all the advantages that Icky lacks. He is a rich kid with an expensive Medabot and a lot more experience training with Similidon. Whereas Icky has only recently started competing, and Medabi is built out of the cheapest parts available. While Icky's unconventional fighting style occasionally gets the better of Koji, he is still the most fearsome opponent around. But Icky and Medabi are learning fast, growing as a team, and progressing up the rankings swiftly. Then, at the halfway point of the series, they definitively shoot past Koji and Similidon by unlocking the Medaforce.
Dude, I rock.
It's the Medaforce!
Kiss your bots goodbye, Medaforce!
It's basically an instant win button against Medabots who don't have it, and Medabi has it while Similidon does not. Even worse, it seems like it's impossible for Koji and Similidon to get it. Suddenly, Icky and Koji's rivalry is flipped on its head. Koji and Similidon are no longer the biggest fish in their small pond. Icky and Medabi, on the other hand, are suddenly burdened by their own success. Nobody in town even dares to fight them now that they're one of the top-ranked Metafighters. And even when they do find an opponent, they no longer need to rely on their combat skills. They just need to activate the Medaforce and walk away victorious. That brings us to the episode I'm discussing today, Me and My Shadow Sword. What do you do when you hit a wall? Koji's insecurity about being surpassed by Icky has been bubbling for a few episodes. In a way, Icky has become to Koji what Koji was to him before, a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. But unlike Icky's journey, Koji doesn't have any stepping stones on the way up. He needs to close the gap between them in one go. So he sets aside his pride and asks for help from the one person he knows could beat Icky, the top-ranked Metafighter in Japan, Space Metafighter X, also known as the Phantom Renegade, also known as Convenience Store Henry. When the episode starts, Koji has already begun training. But curiously, he's exercising himself instead of giving commands to his Medabot.
I don't understand. I mean, shouldn't I be the one learning this stuff?
Space Metafighter X hints to Koji that there's a way for him to deal with the Medaforce, the Shadow Sword attack. In principle, it's quite simple. If he can hit Medabi while Medabi is charging the Medaforce, he can disrupt its activation and gain an advantage. But Koji will need to train his speed and reflexes to exploit the small window that charge time gives him. This is where the episode hints at a key weakness in Koji and Similidon's partnership. While Similidon is a top-of-the-line model, best of the best, Koji is basically just a kid whose parents could buy him the most expensive toy. Compared to Icky and Medabi, who had to make do with cheap parts, Koji simply hasn't had to put in as much work to get to where he is. But now that he's backed into a corner by Ikki's progress, he'll have to confront his complacency. That's why he is the one exercising here. Ikki and Medabi have heard that Koji is preparing a countermeasure for the Medaforce, and they're getting worried. But training without an opponent isn't proving fruitful, and they're not sure how to prepare for Koji's counterattack anyway. Space Metafighter X appears and provokes the pair. What would you do if the advantage you've been relying on is suddenly taken away?
Koji's getting pretty nimble with the Shadow Sword, Ikki. He may be able to neutralize the Medaforce when you use it.
Really? How?
A better question would be, what would you do if that were to happen?
While Ikki and Medabi are idling around, Koji trains. And trains. And trains. Until...
Hey! That's it!
What's it?
It's the secret to using the Shadow Sword. Now I can defeat the Medaforce.
The next day, the row battle between Ikki and Koji starts. Koji and Similodon seem confident that they've mastered the Shadow Sword. Ikki and Medabi seem determined to win as well.
Then it's agreed. Just let me get out. Metafighters ready? Row battle!
The match starts with a stare down. Koji is waiting for his window to use the Shadow Strike. But Ikki seems cautious of Koji's new technique and is not activating the Medaforce yet.
The split second Medabi unleashes the Medaforce. That's when Similodon will strike. No sooner, no later.
I'm shaking him out just a little longer.
Suddenly, the glow of the Medaforce starts appearing over Medabi.
Now, Similodon!
The moment of truth.
Unsheath the Shadow Sword!
Medabi! Now!
Where? I'll take a little nap now.
And just like that, Koji loses the battle. So, what happened? Ikki and Medabi had hidden a special Metapart weapon underneath the cape, which could turn Medabi invisible. Then, they pretended to activate the Medaforce to psych Koji out. When Koji used the Shadow Sword technique, they could evade it just in time for a counterattack. But what is important here is not that Ikki won and Koji lost. Instead, what is important is that Ikki didn't rely on the Medaforce as a crutch to win, instead beating Koji using his strategic skills. He proved that he could learn beyond his greatest advantage, instead of stagnating and becoming complacent. And on the other side of the field, Koji proved that he closed the gap between him and Ikki. While the Shadow Sword didn't bring him victory, it did force his opponent to abandon the Medaforce, which leveled the playing field again. By the end of the episode, in spite of all of Koji's training, Ikki is still the superior Metafighter. But that doesn't mean they're both in the same place they started from. They challenged each other to improve beyond what they could do on their own. In turn, they pulled themselves up to each other's level to reach even greater heights. It is rivalry at its best.
The Medaforce is a powerful weapon, but there are many high-ranked opponents who control its power. You need more than just the Medaforce to compete at the World Championship level.
And now that they're both here, they can finally set their eyes on the next level of competition, the World Championships. So what is the moral of the story? How can the dynamics of rivalry be applied in a video game context? Did I just want an excuse to rewatch Medabots?
See you around!